Where are you? You are wherever your attention is. My name is Goodman, and we are pleased to bring you this program on mindfulness. This program this evening was sponsored by the Arnie Goodman Memorial Fund. After my late husband passed, this fund was created by Temple Israel, including many of you. The purpose of this fund is to give back to our community through educational programs designed to enrich our lives. Arnie was a kind, giving soul and extremely family-oriented. Family was everything to him, and bringing our nephew, Dr. Matthew Goodman, aka Chatty, to speak here this evening, that's an inside joke, has a special meaning to me. Temple Israel has many amazing funds, and should there be a birth, a death, a mitzvah of any kind, donating to any of these funds will enable many great future programs. These donations will make a difference for our community. Many of you have probably heard the starfish story. It all started when a young girl was walking along the beach, upon which thousands of starfish had been washed up during a terrible storm. When she came to each starfish, she would pick it up and throw it into the ocean. People watched her with amusement. She had been doing this for quite some time, when a man approached her and said, "Little girl, why are you doing this? Look at this beach. You can't save all these starfish. You can't begin to make a difference." The girl seemed crushed, suddenly deflated, but after a few moments, she bent down, picked up another starfish, and as she hurled it as far as she could into the ocean, she looked up at the man and replied, "To this one, I made a difference." We are hopeful that this evening's program will make a difference in each one of your lives. I would now like to turn it over to Carrie, who will introduce Dr. Matthew Goodman.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you and the Goodman family. There's lots of you here, so we welcome you all. Gail, thank you. And Arnie is here. I feel his presence, and we are thrilled to have his nephew, Dr. Matthew Goodman, in the house. Dr. Goodman is a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical assistant professor of psychiatry and the behavioral sciences at the Keck School of Medicine at USC. Dr. Goodman has been practicing meditation for 15 years and has been teaching mindfulness to children and adults for the past 10 years. He has worked with students, teachers, parents, athletes, and healthcare professionals in this capacity, including his current work at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Dr. Goodman provides coaching and consulting to individuals and organizations in the areas of well-being, conscious leadership, and systems-level change. He has authored several peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters on mindfulness and mind-body health, and is the author of Simple Stress Reduction, Easy and Effective Practices for Kids, Teens, and Adults. He lives in Los Angeles. He left us, all of us here in Michigan, and moved out there, where he has fully embraced the lifestyle of overpriced lattes and spending his free time at Whole Foods. And we are so happy to welcome him back to Temple Israel, Dr. Goodman.
Thank you, Carrie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Carrie and Gail and everyone who was involved in putting this together. Honestly, this is such an honor to be here, especially in memory of my Uncle Arnie. He truly would have loved to be here with all of us. And thank you all for coming and being here today. So before we get started, I actually wanted to start with a bit of a practice, if everyone is open to it. So in a minute, I'm just going to have you turn to the person to your right and turn to the person to your left and just make eye contact and smile with them. So go ahead and do that. So in a minute, we're going to dive right into a mindfulness practice so we can actually get a taste of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is mindfulness and slowing down. But I always like to start our mindfulness practice with gaining a sense of safety and connection. It's hard to go inside of our body and inside of our mind. It's not always safe for us to do so. And so I just want us to feel that we're grounded here, that we're present in this room, and that we're safe while we're here. So if it's comfortable for you now, I'll just invite you to go ahead and close your eyes. And if you'd rather keep your eyes open, you can just take a soft gaze in front of you. Maybe just starting out by feeling your feet on the floor. Noticing your body making contact with the seat that you're resting on. Starting to notice your breath. Feeling your breath at the tips of the nostrils. Feeling the coolness of the breath on the inhale, the warmth on the exhale. And maybe even just saying gently to yourself, breathing in as you're breathing in, breathing out as you're breathing out. Whenever you're ready, you can open the eyes and come back to our space here. Just take a moment to check in and see how you're feeling. Checking in with your mind, checking in with your body. Maybe noticing how you feel in this moment compared to just a couple minutes ago. Is there even just the most subtle shift here? A little bit more awareness, a little bit more presence. Does anyone notice even just a tiny shift? So I want to start off with a quote that I came across recently. We never keep to the present. We recall the past. We anticipate the future as if we found it too slow in coming and we're trying to hurry it up. Or we recall the past as if to stay its too rapid flight. We almost never think of the present. Thus, we never actually live but hope to live. And since we're always planning how to be happy, it is inevitable that we should never be so. So this is Blaise Pascal in the 17th century. He was a philosopher. And Pascal here was referring to the proclivity of our mind to always be stuck or thinking about the future or the past. Can anyone relate to that experience? I think a lot of us, if not all of us, just by nature of being a human being, know what that's like, to have difficulty being present. And I think that actually today, it's harder than ever for us because of the world that we live in to be present. And therefore, I also think that it's more important than ever for us to slow down and be present. And that's what I hope we can experience together today. And I think just by being here, we've already done that. And that's really what this talk is about, is how to slow down. What are some practical ways that we can slow down and have a more intimate relationship with ourselves and with the present moment so that we can experience the fullness and richness of life. So there's some history to this practice of mindfulness, this practice of being aware, being present. The word sati in Sanskrit means mindfulness. This comes from the Buddhist tradition, and it's translated as being present, or being aware, or remembering to be aware. But there's also some precedent for this in the Jewish tradition as well. There's a word that comes up in the Jewish texts called Yishuv Hada'at. And I'm trying to find the rabbis here. I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly. Rabbi Kaluzny, I got a thumbs up there. Rabbi Yedwa. Okay. Thank you. Yishuv Hada'at. So this comes up throughout the Jewish text. So we know that throughout spiritual traditions for thousands of years, there's been this reference to slowing down and being present, being mindful. We've known the importance of this. We know that it impacts our mental health, our physical health. But I think a lot of us feel like this sweet young woman sometimes, especially today. Feeling like we're so overwhelmed and stimulated all the time. How many people have one of these devices? How many people have it on them right now? So this is our experience in the modern world. We have text messages that we have to respond to. I have to keep up with notifications from Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. I have emails that I have to keep up with. I was having a conversation the other day with a friend who's a parent, and she was telling me how difficult it is to keep up with all of the programming and the extracurricular activities, the play dates, all while trying to stay sane. We're filtering and experiencing so much information at one time, and yet we're still called to practice this mindfulness, this Yishuv Hada'at. But it's a challenge for us. We're up against a pretty tall task here in practicing this skill. And I think that one of the side effects of technology is how it's impacting our mental health. And I'm not here to blame technology or say that this is the only thing impacting mental health, but we know that mental health rates for both kids and adults are continuing to skyrocket. So this is just a graph of anxiety over the past couple decades in the United States, and we can see a pretty clear increase. Same thing for depression here. And the groups that are affected most severely by this are younger people. So this line here with the sharpest increase is 18 to 25-year-olds. And similarly in this graph we see younger adults and then teenagers, 12 to 17, showing the fastest or the most increase in anxiety and depression. I personally think that the world speaks to us in symptoms. Does anyone remember COVID-19? So here we have this opportunity to slow down. I think that the pandemic was a symptom, was a way that the world was speaking to us, asking us, giving us an opportunity to slow down. It literally forced us into retreat. It forced us into our homes. It locked us into our homes, asked us to reflect, start paying attention, to notice maybe what's wrong with our life, start tending to our relationships more deeply. And I think that we did that to some extent, but we've also kind of rebounded back into the status quo of things, and things have gotten back to normal, and people reporting being busier and feeling more overwhelmed than ever before. And again, here, the data, the science reflects this. These are just looking at mental health rates over the past few years since COVID. So we can see again here, I know it's difficult to see, but anxiety in adults continuing to go up. These graphs here, this one up here, the top, these bottom two are looking at substance use and depression and suicidal thoughts among teenagers. Those have continued to go up. I have a colleague in the UK, his name is Louis Weinstock, and he describes our kids as canaries in the coal mine, meaning that children are like the expressions. They're the most sensitive population. They're the most sensitive to what's happening, all of the chaos of the world, the increasing pace of life of the world. And that's why we're seeing that particular slice or population affected most acutely. Canaries in the coal mine asking us, showing us, pleading with us, maybe, some way, how can we start to slow down? How can we start to practice and incorporate mindfulness a little bit more deeply into our lives? So hopefully, we'll get a sense of how to do that today. We're going to do a little bit more practice. We're going to brainstorm together, and hopefully we can walk away with some sort of idea or something actionable for ourselves as far as how we can do that. But I thought before we talk about mindfulness, I thought I'd share a little bit about how I came to the practice and why I'm here talking about mindfulness. I was waiting for that. So yes, some baby pictures up here. And by the way, this, it might be hard to see, but this says, "I love Temple Israel." I had to throw that in. I had a lot of anxiety as a kid, and I knew a lot of you, and so some of you may have known that, may not have known that, but I was a pretty anxious kid. I had stomach aches all the time. Truthfully, I spent a lot of time in the bathroom, probably in that bathroom right there at Temple Israel. It was difficult for me to pay attention. I had trouble focusing in school sometimes. I experienced a lot of rumination, so I wasn't very present, and I still struggle with that. So I truthfully came to this practice by necessity. I had to come to mindfulness. I had to figure out some way to help myself cope with what was happening internally for me and to be more present. So I ended up going to Michigan State University. Go Green. I think I just alienated half of the crowd and got another half on this side. But I ended up going to Michigan State University, and I started practicing meditation there. My roommates thought they didn't know what I was doing. But I started practicing mindfulness and meditation, and I started noticing that it helped me to focus better. And it helped me relate to my experience in a different way. I started relating to my thoughts and my feelings with greater kindness and compassion. And I found that I was able to stay calmer in the midst of stressful situations. So I really took to this practice. I eventually graduated from MSU. And at the time, I had a friend who was living in Los Angeles, and he told me about this Zen Buddhist monastery in LA that you can go and you can live at. So just like any other normal 22-year-old kid, I decided to move to Los Angeles and go live in a Zen Buddhist monastery. I think my mom probably had 2 panic attacks. One because I was leaving Michigan, and the other because,
You're doing what? You're gonna pray to a Buddha?
so there's actually a term for this phenomenon for Jewish people that go and study Buddhism. They're called Jubus. Are there any other Jubus out there? Where's Gail? You're a Jubu. So rest assured, if you are a Jewish mother and you have a child who is interested in Buddhism, I assure you this is a completely normal and safe phenomenon. Don't worry. So I lived there for a year. I lived there and practiced. And one of the things that I really walked away from that experience with is that meditation is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. There are different types of practices that can be helpful for different people. And I think that meditation itself isn't necessarily for everyone. In fact, there are some people who are not going to benefit from meditation. might actually be harmful for meditation. So one of the things that I really want to convey and get across today is that you don't have to become a monk. You don't even have to sit down and practice meditation necessarily to practice mindfulness. There are other ways of bringing this sense of presence, bringing the sense of calmness, bringing stress reduction into our lives. And that's really why I ended up writing this book. That's why I was inspired to do that. I started collecting different stress reduction practices, other alternatives to meditation to make this accessible. Not everyone is going to want to practice meditation, but if you do, that's fantastic. But it doesn't have to be a sitting meditation practice. So hopefully that's one of the things that we can walk away with today. This is in Japan, by the way. This is at a Buddhist monastery. It's very cool. So I lived there for a year. I ended up going to graduate school and studied clinical psychology and continued to practice and started teaching mindfulness. I started doing research on mindfulness. My dissertation looked at a mindfulness program for elementary school students and how it affected their emotional health, their cognitive health, and their academic functioning. And now I'm here with you all. Okay, so I want to come back to Pascal for a minute. This is another quote from him. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And again, here I think Pascal being prophetic about the future, identifying that all of humanity's problems come from men. Just kidding. Joking. But I think this quote really encapsulates the place, the experience that we find ourselves in these days. How many of us just ever sit quietly and do nothing without being distracted by something? One person. I love, you should be up here. Yeah, so-called people. And I'm guessing that you do that because you find some sort of benefit in doing that, being able to slow down. It's hard to do. I think especially when we're so addicted, so attached to our devices. But I really think that this kind of encapsulates the experience that many of ourselves find ourselves in today. So I just kind of want to present a little bit of a model for kind of what's happening for us internally as we're becoming more attached to some of our devices and as technology continues to play a bigger and bigger role in our life. Can I pick on someone? I promise it won't be bad. Actually, since I know you were super mindful, do you mind if I use you as an example? What's your name? Barry. Okay, thank you, Barry. So, and Barry, I'm choosing you because I know you're super, super mindful, but just as an example, let's say Barry is experiencing some sort of discomfort. We can all relate to this. We experience discomfort on a daily basis. We have a feeling of sadness come up, feeling of agitation, nervousness, anxiety, whatever it is. We experience some discomfort. So let's say Barry's experiencing that, and normally, maybe, thousands of years ago, or even hundreds, or even decades ago, we might actually have to sit with that experience. We might have to experience it. There are ways we can distract ourselves, but we might be forced to be with our emotions in some way. Now, we have this right at our fingertips. An extremely reliable distraction device. And it works really well in distracting us. And it works really well in taking away those feelings of discomfort. So Barry, and again, just to make it clear, Barry is probably the most mindful person in this room. We all know that. But we're just saying hypothetically, Barry feels some sort of discomfort. He uses a distraction device, which takes away the discomfort temporarily. So this removes discomfort. This is called negative reinforcement. This just means that a behavior is reinforced when something is taken away. So the bad negative emotion is taken away. And what happens is it ends up fueling in long-term more discomfort. And it actually ends up fueling that same behavior. Our brain learns that, okay, when I'm feeling something I don't like, I just go on Instagram, and then I feel better. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's a really effective short-term strategy, but not necessarily an effective long-term strategy. So over time, what ends up happening through this process of negative reinforcement is that we might actually kind of lose our ability to tolerate discomfort. The bandwidth for what we're able to tolerate internally with our emotions and our sensations continues to narrow. And we might actually end up feeling more and more discomfort. And because of that, we need more and more distraction in order to distract ourselves. So this is kind of the unfortunate situation that many of us, especially younger generations, are faced with now. And this is why I say it's more difficult than ever for us to be mindful, to practice presence. I mean, we are really facing a very challenging task here in practicing these skills. Our phones are not helping. They do a lot of good, but just pointing out. So how can we start to reverse that process? How can we help to fortify ourselves a little bit against the realities of the modern world? So this is your brain on mindfulness. And unless we have any neuroscientists or I know we have one psychologist, at least, or any other psychologists in here, the pictures might not mean a whole lot to you, but I'll explain a little bit about what some of these brain areas mean and what they do. And if people are interested, we can always jump into more of the science in the Q&A. So people have probably heard of a brain region called the amygdala. I feel like that's something that a lot of people have heard. Who's heard of that brain area? Yeah, a lot of hands. So as we all know, the amygdala being responsible for processing really negative emotions. So anxiety, fear, it lights up when we're experiencing negative emotion. It helps us detect threat. The front part of our brain here, called the frontal cortex, is involved in paying attention. So when we practice mindfulness, we actually strengthen, build more connections in the frontal cortex, helps us focus. But one of the other cool things that happens is that when we practice mindfulness, we start to build more connections between the frontal cortex and the amygdala. The amygdala is kind of embedded deeper within our brain in this area called the limbic system. And as we start to practice mindfulness or meditation or other stress reduction practices, we actually start to strengthen the connection between those two so that when I am feeling dysregulated in some way, my frontal cortex then can come in and help to turn the dial down on that experience. It can help us, this is called emotion regulation. Basically, it just means that we're able to feel and identify and regulate our emotions. It's a really healthy skill, especially for kids to learn. And by the way, I mentioned my dissertation topic. This was, looking at mindfulness in schools. That came from a desire for myself. I really wish that I learned these things in school. I have a mentor who says that we ask kids to pay attention, but we don't teach them how to pay attention. So mindfulness teaches us how to pay attention. So that's one of the ways, that's one of the brain areas you can strengthen. And there's also this other really important part of our brain here is called the insula. Has anyone heard of the insula? It's a little more esoteric, I think. Any hands? No. So the insula helps us to feel what's happening inside of our body. It's this skill or this process called interoception. It's really important for being able to tap into and feel our body sensations. That brain region will grow, will strengthen with meditation practice. So we have a more intimate connection with what's happening internally inside of us. And then again, being able not just to feel that, but being able to then regulate our emotions when things get difficult. And of course, there has been so much research done over the past 2 decades on mindfulness and mindfulness-based practices. We know that mindfulness can be helpful for a range of mental health disorders, from anxiety to depression to ADHD. It helps to strengthen and balance our autonomic nervous system. I think one of the coolest things, and this is really what got me interested in studying mindfulness as a graduate student, is learning that mindfulness can actually change the expression of our genes. So some of our genes, for example, code for inflammation, or basically the proteins that produce inflammation in the body. We know that inflammation plays a really important role in our health. People who practice meditation can actually start to downregulate or turn down that process, meaning that they're turning down the activity of genes that code for inflammation in the body. And of course, the more practice people do, the stronger benefits that we see. But a lot of this research is looking at mindfulness-based interventions over the course of 8 weeks. That's kind of the standard protocol in research. Some of them looking at mindfulness over the course of 6 weeks. So just 6 weeks of practice, maybe 20 minutes a day, can actually create some of these changes in our brain and in our body. But again, it doesn't have to be mindfulness. It doesn't have to be meditation. There are other stress reduction practices that we can do on a daily basis, or when we're feeling stressed out, that can really help us to create this sense of calm. So these are just some of the exercises that are in the book. Hopefully you all received a copy. And in a moment here, we can do some of these exercises together. And I'll even let you all choose if anything stands out to you. We can just take a vote by show of hands. But we can do some practices together, so again, that you get an experiential sense of being able to do some of these practices. I think it can even be more simple than that. The book is called Simple Stress Reduction. I really want these things to be simple and accessible for people. So how else can we slow down? It doesn't even have to be doing like some, breathing exercise or anything fancy like that. There are other ways that we can bring this sense of presence into our everyday life. Going for a mindful walk, for example. When you go for your walk, maybe taking out your headphones if that feels good for you, and just opening up your senses, listening to sounds, noticing whatever you see around you. See if you can notice something that you've never noticed before on that same walk. Having some sort of morning ritual. So this might be, for example, having a cup of tea every morning, doing something, carving out some time for ourselves on a daily basis where we can, again, be more intimate with ourselves, with our experience. Just sitting in silence. Again, coming back to sitting in silence for 30 minutes or 20 minutes or 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be doing meditation or mindfulness, whatever that means. We can just pull out our phone and set a timer for 10 minutes or 30 minutes. I love doing this. Sometimes I don't want to practice mindfulness or meditation. So just setting the timer for 30 minutes and then just see what happens. But our brain really appreciates that. It's like taking our brain for a spa day. giving it a chance to slow down and to rest. I hear that religious practice in this place called Temple Israel can be really helpful for people. So again, just by being here today, we're all cultivating a greater sense of presence together. And of course, going and doing religious practice and being with community is an excellent way to cultivate mindfulness or Yishuv Hada'at. Being out in nature, we all know how helpful this is. And we can even be mindful when we're engaging in activities that don't feel mindful. They feel like they're the opposite of mindful. So, for example, when we're on social media, we can be mindful of that process, of what it feels like when I'm scrolling on Instagram. How does my body and my brain start to feel after 5 or 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour of doing this practice? There was a research study that was done. This is kind of one of the seminal studies that was done in the field where they were looking at people who wanted to quit smoking cigarettes. And so they took these people, they divided them up into 2 different groups. One of the groups, they basically just used the same types of strategies that are normally used when you're trying to quit some sort of behavior. They educated them on the health detriments of smoking cigarettes and said just try to resist when the urge comes up. Basically sort of like finger wagging, like just don't do it. Try your best, just don't do it. So that was one group. The other group, they told them, okay, if you want to smoke a cigarette, go ahead and smoke the cigarette. Just do it, but do it mindfully. Notice how it smells. Notice how it tastes. Notice what you feel as you're smoking the cigarette and how you feel afterwards. So what they found was that actually the group that was told to go ahead and smoke cigarettes but do it mindfully actually quit more often than the other group. And that's because they actually got closer to their experience. Mindfulness helps us learn. It helps us learn what's useful for us and what's not useful. So the group actually, that second group, noticed, yeah, I don't really like the way it smells so much, or I don't like the way it tastes, or I don't like the way it makes me feel. So again, coming back to social media here, this is what I would tell a client, for example, who might be struggling with something and they've tried over and over, maybe to help break some sort of habit. If we're gonna do it, let's just do it and do it mindfully. Mindfulness helps us to learn and facilitates behavior change. So I want to jump into maybe another practice in a moment here, but before we do so, I just wanted to close with this quote here. This is from Thomas More. He's one of my favorite authors. He wrote Care of the Soul and Dark Nights of the Soul. He says that soul, which he uses interchangeably with the word psyche, is not going to be healed solely by means of 1 hour of interior retreat in the midst of an active modern life. A retreat from the world may have to be more serious and more constantly present in our lives than a weekly counseling visit or an occasional camping trip. And I love camping, and as a psychologist, I'm definitely a proponent of counseling visits. But what he's referring to here is that our practice of awareness of presence has to somehow be infused within our life, meaning that we shouldn't do these practices, these stress reduction practices that we're talking about to get away from life, although that's certainly helpful. It's certainly helpful to carve time out to get away to do things, but actually we can do these practices, we can practice mindfulness to get closer to our life, to have a more intimate relationship with what we're experiencing in each and every moment. so that we can show up to our life, whatever's happening for us, however that makes us feel, with a greater sense of presence, with a greater sense of gratitude, and really appreciating and feeling the sacredness of each moment. So I'm going to wrap it right there, but I thought maybe we can do one more practice together, if people are up for it, and then go into the Q&A portion of the talk. How's that sound? Does anything look appealing on this menu of items here? Anything? Sleep. Sleep, 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 sleep. Gratitude. All right, we got the gratitude crowd over here. Sleep crowd. Any? Breathing. Excellent. By show of hands, who would like breathing? Okay. And by show of hands, who would like gratitude? This is tough. And by show of hands, sleep. Gail, you choose. Let's do a gratitude practice. She says gratitude, great. Well, the good news is that all of these are in the book. So, and hopefully you'll have a copy. And the way that it's designed, again, is to be really, really accessible and easy to use. So each of these sections contains multiple practices, and they're written there in step-by-step fashion, 1, 2, 3, and written at the reading level of basically 8 and older. So it's easy to use for adults, easy to use for kids. So I'm feeling indecisive, but let's do a gratitude practice. I think that fits nicely into the last section that we just talked about here. So I'll just invite you to get comfortable if you're not already. And if you'd like, you can close the eyes if it feels good for you to do so, or feel free to keep them open. And for this practice here, I'll just invite you, if it feels good for you, to put a hand or two over your heart. Maybe just noticing your heartbeat. And starting to take some deep breaths into that heart area. It's almost as if the heart is doing the breathing. Deep inhale and slow exhale into that heart space. Just see what you notice here. Maybe you notice the heart slowing down on the exhale. And as you're continuing to breathe this way, I'll just invite you to draw to mind something that gives you a sense of unconditional love. This might be a person, or it could be a pet, it could be a place, someone or something where you feel unconditional love. Just bringing that person or that thing or that place to mind and imagining them being here in front of you. Just feeling a sense of gratitude, maybe cultivating gratitude for that person, for your relationship to that person or that thing, that they exist. Continuing to breathe in this way, breathing deeply. And whenever you're ready, feel free to open the eyes and come on back to our space here. Anyone want to share any observations that they had during that practice? Feeling of your breathing slowing down, and actually everything slowing down, your heart rate, like your whole nervous system coming down. Any other observations? Yeah.
I don't know if this is strange or not, but halfway through my thinking about what was bringing me gratitude, I had a total change to somebody else, like right from the beginning. I was actually thinking about my dog initially, and then it turned into someone else.
Yeah, so the person or the thing switched. And as that happened for you, what did you notice? Did it kind of throw you out of it? You had difficulty bringing gratitude, or that?
I was surprised. It was a wonderful feeling. It was something special, and it just surprised me. Because I was thinking about my dog while you were there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So almost as if like there was this person or there was this thing that's there that maybe was in the background of your awareness. You weren't even so conscious of your feeling of gratitude for that person, and they just sort of popped in for you. So feeling of surprise, pleasant surprise. Thanks for sharing.
I'd like to share too. So
Please.
Tomorrow is 9 years since my mom has been gone, and it was like an opportunity for me to feel grateful for everything that she was and did for me. So being surrounded by an incredible environment of Temple Israel, which is home to us, felt comforting. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And glad that you're here in this community. What else? Any other observations anyone wants to share? So this is a really easy, simple practice. It took us, what, like 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes to practice. And I guess it's over. These are the types of practices that we can use at any time, anywhere. Something as simple as putting a hand or two over our heart and taking a couple deep breaths. It literally takes 10 seconds to do. So pausing, finding our breath, finding our connection into the here and now. These are all ways that we can slow down and practice a little bit more mindfulness. Thank you everyone for participating and for sharing, and thank you so much for your attention. Let's do it.
Any questions? Yes.
It's more specific. You mentioned other books that you've written. I think you mentioned something about teens, or I don't know. I'm not familiar with you, so.
Other book recommendations for kids.
Whether it's you, I have 3 teenage daughters that are going through different phases of life right now. So,
Any help?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. I will throw out maybe a couple author names. The first one that I'll throw out is Kristen Neff. And I can write this down for you too. But she does a lot of work on self-compassion. And I say her because we just did sort of a self-compassion gratitude practice, and she's just a wonderful author. I think some of her work might focus on teens, adults. There's a book by Karen Bluth who does self-compassion for teens. I can write these down for you. But I would say those two names, and there are just so many tons of resources out there. And if you shoot me an email, I can also send you some other book recommendations. Yeah, thanks.
How do you cope when you listen to the news and it's out of control and you don't know what to do? You internalize and you just feel helpless and you watch the nation imploding. How do you come back to mindfulness in that situation?
Thank you for the question. I know we can all relate to this. I know I can relate to this. Aside from maybe like the advice, which I'm sure you have already gotten from someone, which is to limit the amount of news that you take in, how can we cope with this mindfully? One thing that's helpful sometimes is to think about, even just to make a list of like the things that we can control and the things that we can't control. And it's kind of going without saying that there are things that obviously things that we can't control, but even just sorting that out for us, putting that down on paper, and trying to keep that in mind throughout our day. But really what mindfulness does for us in this context is that, yes, there are things that are stressful that are happening for us in the world. There are things that are stressful that are happening for us in life. And it doesn't mean that we don't think about those things or we can't attend to those things or try to solve our problems. It's not saying that we're just going to, like, again, become monks and not deal with the world. But how do we deal with it at each and every moment? Like when I'm having the thoughts, the stressful thoughts about what's happening in the world, and I'm noticing how that starts to bring my heart rate up and my blood pressure, and I'm starting to get sweaty or muscle tension. These are the moments where mindfulness practice can come in and help us to be more aware of what's happening, and then using some tool to be able to manage what's going on for us. Coming back to our breath, putting our hand on our heart, something like that. So I think a great thing to continue coming back to is like, yes, there's a macro experience. There are all the things that we have to deal with, but also how do I show up at each and every moment? And if I can bring a little bit more awareness, a little bit more compassion into each and every moment, my experience, my relationship to this moment actually starts to change. Like I might still have some of these stressful thoughts about what's happening in the world or the stress of what I have to attend to in my everyday life, but there's a greater sense of presence there. There's maybe a little bit more calm behind those thoughts. Or I'm able to then, because I'm being mindful, choose to pay attention to someone else. So we build our mindfulness muscle over time, and maybe we find that we're a little bit less distracted or pulled away by all the stressful things that are happening up here for us. Be able to come back and just experience the joy of being in the present moment. It's a great question. No one has a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. First of all, you were fantastic.
There you
You were awesome. I have problems with driving. So, it's like, seriously, my day is fine, but when I get on the road, that's what creates the most source of rage for me. And it's like, what do you do? What do you just do? What do you do? Other than, seriously, I'm being 100% honest. What do you do? What are your suggestions for driving and road rage?
Aside from, thank you. Aside from never moving or visiting Los Angeles, so I think again, this skill, the thing about mindfulness is that it really generalizes for us across situations, and whatever benefit you get from mindfulness is probably not going to take away that road rage or the anger that comes. Like that's going to be there. As much as I try to practice and preach mindfulness, I get pissed on the road in Los Angeles, of course, or anywhere. So these are natural things that happen to us. We might not be able to necessarily stop those things from coming up for us, but how long are we staying stuck in it? Maybe is one way to think about it, right? How long is that lasting there for us? Can I come back to my breathing in that moment? Or on the road, you can even do driving meditations where you're just listening to the sounds. It's not super pleasant to listen to, but listen to the sounds of what's happening on the road. Feeling your body on the seat that you're in. Anything that you're doing where you're bringing your attention back into the present moment. Because in the moment of road rage, my mind is obviously upset with someone, but it's thinking about all the things that I want to say to them or do to them, all the frustration. So bringing yourself back, this can help us to regulate ourselves, hopefully, so that maybe we're not stuck there as long, or you're kind of building that connection that we talked about between our frontal cortex and our amygdala, where when the amygdala lights up and we go off into road rage, well now if I've started practicing this skill of being able to like slow down and slow down my physiology, each time we do that, we strengthen that muscle. And so over time, hopefully it gets a little bit easier, but I get it. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Alex.
Just makes me think about my son a lot. How do you incorporate this into a stubborn 6-year-old life that they're not willing to want to do, but I
Yeah, great question. So the question is like, how do you incorporate this into the life of a 6-year-old or a child, or someone who doesn't want to do the practice? And that can be extremely difficult for obvious reasons, trying to introduce something to someone that they don't want to do. So thinking about, are there clever ways to bring this practice into their everyday life? So it might be like eating mindfully, if there's a way to do that. So when we eat food, seeing if we could really notice like how it tastes, how it smells. These are all ways still of bringing our attention into the present moment. Periods of being able to like just be quiet or slow down, or as we're walking, if there's room for mindfulness there. Noticing the things around us if we're walking in the neighborhood, noticing sounds, noticing the feeling of my feet touching the ground. So I think it's really hard with kids. We have to get really clever about ways to practice, but I think it's a really good question because, trying to ask a 6-year-old to sit down and like practice meditation, they're gonna be like, Mom, what are you saying? What are you asking me to do here? But anything clever that we can do, it doesn't have to be like a sitting meditation practice, but any ways that we're paying attention in the present moment is we're practicing mindfulness.
I'm wondering if this last question, I'm wondering if one of the responses might be that young children should not have so much information that they just are way too young to process, whether it's, news, and talk at the table, or relationships, or, I don't know. I mean, I can go into lots of things and I don't want to step on anybody's toes and say things I shouldn't say, but I do wonder how much, it just seems like sometimes parents use their children as a sounding board. I wonder if they just get too much information. And maybe that's another way of looking at it. I don't know. I'm asking.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. No, you bring up a great point. She was saying how children are just fed so much information, and I mean, again, it's like I really sympathize with kids these days. It's hard. It's really hard being a kid, and it's hard being a parent because, I imagine your kid wants to play on the iPad. Like all their friends have the iPad or a phone and have access to technology. And what are you going to do? Restrict access to everything, to games and stuff. So it's really hard because there's so much available to people. So, I mean, it's a great question, and I know it's a very individual choice for each family how to manage that, but I think it's increasingly hard to do these days, and so we have to be increasingly intentional about it.
I thought I should point out that my wife is a retired elementary teacher, and so therefore she's had some experiences beyond what I can believe. The other thing is, as far as road rage goes, there are so many crazies out there, and think of the consequences before you present them with a birthday present, or otherwise, swear in the car, but don't keep the windows up. And when somebody is riding my tail when I'm going 53, 57 and a 45 mile an hour speed limit, I move over and let them go. It's just not worth it. Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Before Dr. Goodman is going to sign his books out in the atrium, so a lot of thank yous. Thank you all for being here so much. Thank you, Dr. Goodman.